Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to be exhausted all the time? There is a peculiar heaviness to waking up after 12 hours of sleep and feeling like you have rested at all. Your body drags, your mind feels wrapped in fog, you peel yourself from the sheets, and the world feels too bright, too loud, too much. And here's the strange part too, not tired in the way someone who stayed up all night is tired. You're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You're tired in your bones, in your thoughts, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, so you return to bed. Not because you're sleepy, but because the bed is the only place that feels manageable. The blankets become a second skin. The darkness becomes a refuge. Hours dissolve, days blur. And somewhere in the back of your mind a voice whispers that this isn't normal, that something's wrong. But the thought of confronting that truth feels heavier than staying exactly where you are. People on the outside don't understand. They think you're lazy, unmotivated, avoiding responsibility, and maybe you've started to believe them. Maybe you've convinced yourself that you just need to try harder, to set more alarms, to force yourself into the waking world. But every attempt feels like swimming through concrete. Every morning is a negotiation with your own existence. Here's what they do and tell you about sleeping too much. It's not about sleep at all. It's about what you're trying not to feel. It's about the life you're too afraid to live. It's about the weight of consciousness itself becoming unbearable. And until you understand what your body is actually doing when it pulls you under those covers for the third time today, you'll keep mistaking a symptom for the disease. Let me tell you something most people never realize about excessive sleep. It's not rest, it's escape. And your body has very specific reasons for choosing this particular exit door. Sleep, in its healthiest form, is restorative. It's when your brain consolidates memories, when your body repairs tissue, when your nervous system recalibrates for another day of being human. But when sleep becomes excessive, when you're sleeping 10, 12, 14 hours a day and still waking up depleted, something else is happening beneath the surface. Psychologists call this hypersomnia. It's characterized by excessive daytime sleepiness or prolonged nighttime sleep that interferes with daily functioning. But that clinical definition doesn't capture what it actually feels like to live inside a body that and stay awake, inside a mind that keeps pulling you back into unconsciousness. Here's what's really happening. Your nervous system is stuck in what researchers call a defensive state. When the body perceives ongoing threat, whether that's trauma, chronic stress, or unbearable emotional pain, it doesn't just activate fight or flight. Sometimes, when those options feel impossible, it chooses a third response: shut down, freeze, collapse. And excessive sleep is one of the most socially acceptable ways your body can freeze without anyone noticing you. Left the room. Research published in the Journal of Affective Disorders found that people with depression who sleep excessively show distinct patterns of dysregulation in their hypothalamic pituitary axis, the system that governs stress response. In other words, their bodies are so overwhelmed by what they're experiencing that sleep becomes the only state where the alarm bells finally stop ringing. Sleep isn't refreshing because you're not actually resting. You're hiding. Think about this. When did the sleeping start? Not the occasional late morning or the weekend recovery sleep that everyone needs. When did sleep become your default setting? For many people, it traces back to a specific period of loss, a betrayal, a sustained period of feeling unsafe in your own life. Maybe it was a childhood where being awake meant being hypervigilant. Maybe it was a relationship where consciousness meant absorbing someone else's chaos. Maybe it was simply the accumulation of years spent performing a version of yourself that required so much energy that sleep became the only time you could drop the mask. Developmental psychologists have found that children who grow up in unpredictable or emotionally neglectful environments often develop what's called a dampened arousal system. Their bodies learn that being alert, being present, being fully engaged with the world leads to disappointment or pain. So the nervous system adapts. It learns to protect you by pulling you away from full wakefulness. It teaches you that consciousness is dangerous and unconsciousness is safe. This is where excessive sleep becomes a survival mechanism. Your younger self discovered that when you were asleep, you couldn't be hurt. You couldn't disappoint anyone. You couldn't feel the ache of being unseen or the terror of being too visible. Sleep became a place where expectations didn't exist, where performance wasn't required, where you could finally stop trying so hard to exist in a way that made everyone else comfortable. And here's the paradox. The same nervous system that's trying to protect you by keeping you asleep is also the one creating the conditions that make waking life unbearable. Because the more you sleep, the more disconnected you become from your life. The more disconnected you become, the more overwhelming life feels when you do wake up. The more overwhelming it feels, the more your body pulls you back under. It's a cycle that feeds itself, and somewhere in the middle, you disappear. But here's the truth most people miss. Excessive sleep isn't laziness. It's not a weakness. It's your body's intelligent response to an intelligent problem. Your nervous system has assessed the situation and determined that being unconscious is safer than being awake. The question isn't why you're sleeping so much. The question is what has made waking life feel so dangerous that your body would rather not participate in it at all. Now, let's talk about what this actually looks like when it shows up in your adult life. Because excessive sleep doesn't just steal your mornings, it rewrites your entire relationship with time, with people, with yourself. You might find yourself canceling plans not because you don't want to go, but because the thought of leaving your bed feels physically impossible. Not difficult, impossible. There's a weight pressing down on your chest, a fog in your mind, and the gap between where you are and where you need to be feels like an ocean. You do and have the strength to cross. So you send the text, "Sorry, I'm not feeling well." And technically it's not a lie, you're not feeling well. You just can't explain that the illness isn't in your body, it's in the unbearable heaviness of being awake. You might notice that your sleep schedule has become completely divorced from normal circadian rhythms. You're sleeping through sunlight, waking in darkness, existing in a perpetual twilight where days bleed into each other without distinction. Monday feels like Thursday. Morning feels like evening. Time becomes this slippery thing you can't quite grasp. And somewhere in that temporal confusion, you lose track of yourself entirely. Think about this. When someone asks what you did last weekend and you genuinely couldn't remember because you slept through most of it, that's not just fatigue, that's dissociation. You're not present in your own life. You're a visitor in your own body, showing up occasionally but never really staying. And the worst part, you've convinced yourself this is normal. You've normalized your own disappearance. In relationships, this pattern creates a specific kind of distance. Partners learn not to make plans with you. Friends stop inviting you places. And you tell yourself it's fine, that you prefer solitude anyway. But the truth is more complicated. The truth is that you're terrified of being present with other people because presence requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires being awake not just physically, but emotionally. When you sleep 14 hours a day, you never have to risk being truly seen. You never have to navigate the complexity of intimacy. You never have to feel the full weight of another person's disappointment when you couldn't show up the way they need you to. But here's where it gets interesting. The people who sleep excessively are often the same people who, when they are awake, are performing at an unsustainable level. You might be the person who pulls 18-hour workdays, then crashes for an entire weekend. You might be the friend who gives everything to everyone else, then sleeps through your own life. This is what researchers call pathological altruism, where caring for others becomes so consuming that it depletes your capacity to care for yourself. And when you've spent all your energy making sure everyone else is okay, sleep becomes the only place where you're allowed to collapse. Research in the field of behavioral medicine shows that this pattern often correlates with what is called a low internal locus of control. You don't feel like the author of your own life. You feel like something is happening to you, not someone making choices. So you stop making choices. You'll let sleep decide. You'll let unconsciousness become the default, and waking becomes the exception. You might struggle with what psychologists call compassion fatigue, not just toward others, but toward yourself. You've spent so much energy trying to be okay for everyone else that you have nothing left for your own emotional needs. And here's the cruel irony. The more you neglect yourself while awake, the more your body insists on sleep as a form of forced rest. Except it's not a rest, it's shut down. It's your nervous system hitting the emergency brake because you won't slow down voluntarily. And yet, there's something else happening beneath all of this. Because if you're honest, really honest, sleep isn't just an escape from external demands. It's an escape from yourself. From the person you're afraid you've become. From the life you're afraid you're wasting. From the dreams you're too terrified to pursue because pursuing them would mean risking failure. Risking disappointment. Risking the possibility that you try your absolute hardest and still end up exactly where you are. When you're asleep, you don't have to confront the gap between who you are and who you wish you were. You don't have to feel the quiet ache of potential unrealized. You won't have to answer the question that haunts you in moments of clarity. Is this really all there is? The quietest people often feel the most intensely. And the people who sleep the most are often running from feelings so large they don't know how to hold them while standing upright. You might notice that your relationship with productivity has become deeply distorted. On the rare days you manage to stay awake for a full 16 hours, you're filled with this frantic energy, this need to prove you're not lazy, not broken, not the person everyone thinks you are, so you clean the entire house, you answer every email. You complete a week's worth of tasks in a single afternoon, and then you crash hard, because that kind of performance isn't sustainable. It's compensation. It's you trying to earn the right to exist by proving your worth through output. And when you want to maintain that pace, when you inevitably return to sleeping 12 hours a day, You feel like you VA failed. Again. But here's the truth. You haven't failed. You're just exhausted from trying to be enough in a world that convinced you that your inherent worthiness was insufficient. You're tired from wearing masks, from performing versions of yourself that make other people comfortable, from carrying emotional burdens that were never yours to hold. And your body, in its infinite wisdom, keeps pulling you back to sleep because it knows something your conscious mind refuses to accept. You need rest. Not the kind of rest that comes from unconsciousness, but the deeper kind. The kind that comes from finally putting down everything you've been carrying. The kind that comes from admitting that you're not okay. The kind that comes from choosing to be present with yourself, all of yourself, including the parts that hurt. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This speaks to something profound about the relationship between our past conditioning and our present agency. Because here's the invisible truth that most people miss about excessive sleep. It's not just a symptom of depression or anxiety or trauma. It's an existential crisis disguised as a sleep disorder. When you sleep excessively, what you're really doing is refusing to participate in your own becoming. You're stuck in what Jung called the state of unconsciousness, not literally, but psychologically. You're avoiding the hard work of individuation, of becoming a whole person, of integrating all the parts of yourself you've been taught to suppress or deny. Think about the paradox embedded in this pattern. You're sleeping to escape consciousness, but consciousness is the only state in which you can heal, grow, or change. You're trying to rest, but what you're actually doing is postponing the moment when you have to confront the question, who am I when I am not performing? Not hiding, not sleeping my life away. There's a particular kind of terror in that question. Because if you're not the role you play, the mask you wear, the person everyone expects you to be, then who are you? What's left when you strip away the performance? And what if the answer is nothing? What if you've spent so long being what other people needed that you never developed a self of your own? This is where excessive sleep reveals its deepest purpose. It's not just avoidance. It's a postponement of identity formation itself. As long as you're asleep, you don't have to answer the question of who you are. You don't have to build a life. You don't have to take responsibility for your own existence. You can remain in a state of perpetual potential, never actualized, never fully born into yourself. Philosophers have long grappled with the question of consciousness and its relationship to suffering. Existentialists argued that awareness of our own mortality, our freedom, our responsibility creates what they called existential anxiety, the fundamental terror of being a conscious being in an uncertain universe. And for some people, that anxiety is so overwhelming that unconsciousness becomes preferable to awareness. Sleep becomes a way of saying not yet to the demands of existence itself. But here's the deeper irony. The more you avoid consciousness, the more terrifying it becomes. The longer you sleep, the more alienated you become from your own life. And the more alienated you become, the harder it is to wake up. You create the very prison you're trying to escape. And yet, and this is crucial, your body's impulse to sleep isn't wrong. It's just misguided. What you're actually craving isn't unconsciousness. It's peace. You want a state where you don't have to perform, don't have to achieve, don't have to prove your worthiness through constant productivity. You want permission to simply exist without justification, and in a world that measures human value by output, by achievement, by visibility. Sleep is the only place you've found where that permission is granted. The tragedy is that you've mistaken temporary escape for genuine rest. You've confused numbing with healing. You've traded the difficulty of conscious transformation for the ease of unconscious avoidance. And somewhere in that trade, you've lost yourself. But here's what I need you to understand. You're not broken beyond repair. You're not lazy. You're not failing at life. You're exhausted from trying to exist in a way that was never meant for you. And the first step toward healing isn't forcing yourself to stay awake. It's finally understanding why you've needed to sleep in the first place. Healing begins with witnessing, not judging, not fixing, not rushing, just seeing. See the part of you that's so tired it can barely lift its head. See the younger version of yourself that learned consciousness was dangerous and unconsciousness was safe. See the patterns you've inherited, the wounds you've carried, the weight you've been holding. And instead of demanding that you immediately change, just acknowledge, this has been hard. This has been so hard. You might start by asking yourself different questions. Not, why am I so lazy? But, what am I avoiding by staying asleep? Not, what's wrong with me? But what happened to me that made waking life feel this unbearable? The questions you ask determine the answers you find. And questions rooted in compassion lead to understanding, while questions rooted in shame lead nowhere but deeper into the dark. You can choose, and this is crucial, you can choose to meet your tiredness with curiosity instead of judgment. What if your body's need for excessive sleep isn't a failure but a communication? What if it's trying to tell you something about the pace you've been keeping, the roles you've been playing, the life you've been living? What if, instead of fighting it, you listened? This doesn't mean surrendering to sleep forever. It means understanding that sustainable wakefulness requires creating a life worth staying awake for. It means examining the external demands you've internalized, the expectations you've absorbed, The version of success you've been chasing that was never yours to begin with. It means asking, what would my life look like if I built it around what I actually need instead of what I think I should want? The truth is, you can't force yourself awake through willpower alone. You could set 100 alarms, drink endless coffee, shame yourself for every hour spent sleeping, and your body will still pull you back under because the underlying conditions haven't changed. Real healing requires addressing why consciousness feels so intolerable. It requires building a relationship with yourself where being awake doesn't feel like punishment. Some people find that healing starts with tiny movements, not grand transformations, but small acts of presence. Opening the curtains, sitting in sunlight for 5 minutes, feeling your feet on the ground. These aren't solutions, they're invitations. Invitations back into your own body, back into your own life, back into the present moment that you've been avoiding. Others find that healing requires professional support therapy that addresses the underlying trauma, medication that regulates the neurochemical imbalances, medical evaluation that rules out physical causes. There's no shame in needing help. Your body has been trying to survive on its own for so long. It's okay to finally reach for support. And for everyone, healing requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to rest itself. Because the opposite of excessive sleep isn't constant productivity. It's conscious rest. It's the ability to be still without being unconscious. It's learning that you can exist without performing, that you can be vulnerable without being annihilated, that you're worthy of space and time and gentleness even when you're not accomplishing anything at all. Remember the heaviness you felt at the beginning, the exhaustion of being exhausted. That heaviness isn't permanent. It's been protecting you, but it doesn't have to define you. You can honor what it gave you: the survival, the escape, the temporary relief, while also choosing to build something different, something sustainable, something real. You've been asleep to the world, but you're still here, and that matters more than you know. Every day you've managed to exist, even in unconsciousness, is evidence of your resilience. Every time you've pulled yourself from bed even when it felt impossible is proof of your strength. You haven't been wasting your life. You've been surviving it, and survival is not nothing. The life you're avoiding isn't out there somewhere, waiting for you to become worthy enough to claim it. It's right here, in this moment, in this body, in this breath. It doesn't require you to be healed first. It doesn't require you to have all the answers. It just requires you to show up, even if you can only manage it for 5 minutes today, even if you can only be half awake, even if you're still figuring out what it means to be present at all. You've never chose to learn that consciousness was dangerous, but you can choose, right now, to begin unlearning it. You can choose to be gentle with the part of you that's still afraid. You can choose to believe that maybe waking life can become bearable, maybe even beautiful. You're not broken. You're becoming conscious. And this time, you get to do it on your own terms.